Growing up in the early 90s was a very exciting time. It was a time of the 16-bit wars. It was Sega versus Nintendo, the newcomer versus the king of video games.
There's no doubt that Ito and I grew up as Nintendo fans, first and foremost. But there's no denying that Sega, after releasing the Genesis, really understood who they were marketing towards, the more mature and older gamers. So let's take a look at Sega and the systems that they released in the United States.
Are you a Nintendo guy or a Sega guy?
So what's blast processing do? And what if you don't have blast processing?
The first and only game powered by the Super FX microchip. Why go to the next level when you can go light years beyond?
This has been a debate argued among fanboys, hardcore gamers, collectors, and anyone who played a video game in the 1990s. These were two different companies, two different philosophies, and two different styles. And while I prefer Nintendo, Sega is pretty damn great too. With that in mind, Retroware TV will take a look at the North American console releases of Sega. As a company, Sega was started in 1940 under the name Standard Games. It was opened in Hawaii, so contrary to popular belief, Sega was an American company. Primarily in the business of creating coin-operated amusements for U.S. service personnel on military bases during the 1940s and the 1950s. The name was later changed to Service Games, thus the shortened version, Sega, as American as apple pie. The company was eventually moved to Tokyo, and over the years it had changed hands until 1984, when Sega became a completely Japanese-controlled company. Through the 70s and early 80s, Sega was exclusively creating arcade games until the home gaming industry began. The first Sega consoles were exclusive to Japan and Greater Asia. In 1983, the SG-1000 Mark I was released, and in 1984, the SG-1000 Mark II was released as essentially the same system, redesigned and remarketed. The SG-1000 Mark III was released in America as the Sega Master System in 1986. It was released as the NES popularity was strengthening, and the market share was essentially 9-1 in favor of that Nintendo system. The Master System had cartridge inputs, a game card input similar to the TurboGrafx, and peripherals included the underrated Shutter 3D glasses and the standard light gun support. As Mario was taking off for Nintendo, Sega had the much less successful Alex Kidd. With so little success, in 1988 the Master System's distribution rights were sold to Tonka, yes, the yellow dump truck company, and the base system package was released. Regardless of the system being arguably stronger and more capable than the NES, it never really showed its full potential here or even in Japan. However, in Europe, New Zealand, and in Brazil, Sega's 8-bit system did incredibly well and showed real successes for many years. Many imports can still be found from these regions if you are a Master System collector. In fact, in Brazil, the Master System is still being produced in different incarnations today. The Sega Master System 2, a stripped-down version without the card input, was released in 1990 by Sega in an effort to drag some more life out of the market as the Genesis was taking off. It was basically a lower-cost alternative that hoped to take off as the Sega brand name became much stronger. It didn't work. In essence, the Master System failed in the US under the weight of Nintendo's powerhouse. It made some resurgence here in the States when the power-based converter was released for the Genesis and the Master Gear converter was released for the Game Gear. In 1989, Sega made their big splash, and still their biggest success with the release of their Genesis, or the Mega Drive everywhere else in the world. It was released in competition with the Nintendo and the TurboGrafx-16, but its real battle was with the Super Nintendo released in 1991. The original release of the console came packed with Altered Beast and was actually the first game system I bought on my own. This version here has the markdown price of $150 from Electronics Boutique, before it was EB Games or GameStop. When I purchased this system, Sonic the Hedgehog had just been released, and with a send-in card and your proof of purchase, I was able to get the Sonic the Hedgehog game shipped to me for free, in addition to the Altered Beast pack-in. The early version of the Sega Genesis had an expansion port in the back, and the printed tags stated high-definition graphics. If you've ever played the Genesis on an HD TV, you've probably realized that this is not quite right. In following models, the tagline was gone along with the expansion output. Later, a slimmed-down version of the system, the Genesis 2, was released without the headphone jack and volume control. Eventually, the system was licensed to Majesco for release, and the rest of the Genesis 2s and even the smaller Genesis 3 was released by this company. The system's last game release came out in 1998, a successful 9-year run for the Genesis. Sega released many other add-ons which had varied successes. The biggest and most noticeable was the Sega Cd. I personally couldn't wait for the Sega Cd to come out.
Okay, John, show us what you got, John. Jeez, Santa. You know, Santa's getting poorer and poorer. What is that thing? Sega CD, huh? Yeah, take it easy. It's our classic CD.
It's the Sega classic CD. Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective.
Stay tuned for part 2 of Retroware TV's look at the history of Sega and the system releases in North America.